Hello and welcome to Culture Clash, the show where we reveal and investigate the hidden and missing links between culture, politics, economics, philosophy, and theology. The show will reflect our own perspectives on these topics, and whether you agree or not, you are all welcome to the conversation. As usual, for those of you who haven't watched The Peripheral, we begin with our very short review. Should you watch The Peripheral? Yes, absolutely, in caps. Okay, that was it. That was really short. The reason we decided to analyze The Peripheral back-to-back with the three-body problem is that the two shows share some marked similarities between the topics they explore. But while the three-body problem stumbles between concepts not quite sure what it wants to say, The Peripheral zeroes in precisely on what it wants to say. If the three-body problem struggles to find its words, The Peripheral speaks with eloquence. And this is also reflected in its form. The creators of The Peripheral are not only eloquent but artful in painting their story. Why are we reviewing The Peripheral just now, 2 years after it has been released? Frankly, because The Peripheral is one of those rare hidden gems that one feels that should be experienced rather than discussed about. That said, we also believe that there are critical philosophical and cultural elements that are crucial for our day and age and very much worth discussing. After all, this is our show's rationale. As usual, we'll remind you that this video will contain heavy spoilers, so if you haven't watched the show, go watch it and then come back and watch this. If you did watch the show, prepare for a fascinating journey through history, economy, philosophy, and language as we explore this one-of-a-kind series. I'm your host Andrew, and this is Culture Clash. I must confess, the first time I watched The Peripheral, I was totally surprised. I expected a half-baked, run-of-the-mill sci-fi story that would constantly try to make me feel bad because I'm a white, heterosexual male. Boy, I was wrong. The Peripheral is anything but that. On the contrary, to the discerning eye, The Peripheral is an ode to tradition. If anything, I am still struggling to understand how it got greenlit by the studio. The Peripheral is based on the homonymous novel by William Gibson, the author, neuromancer, and the widely recognized father of cyberpunk. In a 2014 interview, Gibson had this to say about different science fiction visions in the 50s.
So I think there were at least two different modalities of pop futurism abroad then, and probably considerably more. It hasn't ever really been a monolithic thing. The gleaming kitchens and the monorail and the flying cars and all of that in the 1950s coexisted with a strain of left-leaning American socio-politically aware prose science fiction, which was being published in contrast to its political opposite. The political opposite was called Astounding Stories, and the liberal sci-fi magazine was called Galaxy.
I believe this quote is key to understanding the world in the peripheral. Keep this in mind because we will come back to this idea from a different perspective later in this video. This is the foundation of the very show you're watching right now. The idea that culture and politics are intertwined. Politics on a smaller or grander scale are indeed inevitable and inescapable in human stories, be them books, theater, films, or video games. However, some storytellers are subtle about how they weave the politics into the story, while others are not. And this lack of subtlety can irritate and alienate audiences. The creators of the three-body problem, for example, clumsily shoehorn politics into their story. The creators of the peripheral, on the other hand, are much more delicate and smart in their approach. The peripheral works on this very simple but fundamental dichotomy: the old world versus the new world, dependable tradition versus unhinged modernity, objective moral values versus the convenient shades of subjective gray. The antithesis is ever present in the series, shown not only between Flynn's time of the 2030s and 2099 London, but even within future London itself. The action in the 2030s is set in the fictional town of Clanton in the real-world Marshall, North Carolina. The backdrop is reminiscent of an old community in the Appalachians. Hugging a large river and surrounded by pastoral landscapes, this is the quintessential idyllic town, centered around family and community under the watchful and caring gaze of God. The fisher's house, isolated as it is in the outskirts of the city, is a beacon of warm light, set against the dark nights of the hills surrounding it. Flynn's family is no stranger to adversity. With their father dead, Flynn and her brother Burton live together and take care of their mother, blinded by glioma. Both Flynn and Burton have their issues, but none of them abandon their duties to the family, nor do they complain about their hardships. They may snap at each other from time to time, but they always apologize and reconcile. Family comes first. In a way, Burton and Flynn act like a sort of platonic husband and wife. Each has their own specific role. Flynn, the nurturer, and Burton, the protector, and both are ultimately faithful to their respective roles. Their situation describes a contemporary societal issue specific not only to the United States, but to Europe and the West in general: the precarious state of the family. But while the family in the West has been brought to this state mostly by ideological influences and socialist policies, Flynn's family has simply been affected by natural calamity. And both are doing their part to weather hardships and protect the family, crippled as it is. Burton, a Marine, still confronting some of his deployment traumas, finds solace in his squad mates and old-time friends living in Clanton. Although initially portrayed as man-children, Burton and his squad soon prove to be courageous, reliable, competent, and deadly in the protection of their friends and families. Flynn, on the other hand, finds her refuge in her mother and her best friend Billy Ann. Their mother, Ella Fisher, even though mostly confined to the house, glues the family together and provides much-needed leadership at critical points when her kids are overwhelmed and the family is threatened. In this, she's somewhat reminiscent, at least to me, of old historical figures like Grand Prince of Moscow Vasily II or the Byzantine nobleman Alexios Philanthropenos, who, though blinded by their adversaries, managed to be great leaders in their times. Even the local Clanton antagonist, Corbell Pickett, a psychotic drug lord, is somewhat bound by tradition and community. While ruthless and vengeful, he is not rash, nor does he needlessly make an annoyance of himself to the people of Clanton. In one instance, he boasts about having made the town safer and more prosperous, and indeed, the town seems to be relatively safe, and while not rich, the people still get by decently. We even get a very short glance at the economy of 2030s America and the general importance of the black market. Flynn's mother's glioma treatment is, as you might imagine, expensive, and Corbell Pickett and his men, however thuggish and self-interested, provide Flynn with the access to the much-needed meds. Ironically enough, even the haptic implants sported by Burton and his squad, although corporate in origin, are designed to rely exactly on the type of unity found between young men who grew up together. Community and tradition are again the key elements here, and this points to a larger picture relevant to our times. You might have noticed that Westerners are quick to observe on TV or all over the internet that socialism is actually working quite well in the civilized West. However, much like the haptic implants in the peripheral, socialism does nothing more than parasite and exploit societal mechanisms already established through the ages. The communities established around Christianity, the rule of law, individual liberty, and the free market. Unlike the haptic implants, though, socialism does nothing to build on and enhance existing community traits and advantages. It solely acts in a parasitic way which eventually dissolves any sense of belonging and community. Some of you may be inclined to ask, what's Christianity have to do with all of this? Surprisingly enough, for a mainstream series aired in 2022, the Peripheral's creators don't shy away from discreetly acknowledging Christianity. Connor, Burton's crippled squadmate, although despondent, alcoholic, and teetering on the verge of suicide, never forgets to say grace before his meal. And Dee Dee, the local doctor, is always seen wearing Holy Cross earrings.
I'm done pretending that I can live in a sim. It ain't real.
It's now time to get back to the earlier quote from William Gibson. Remember how he remarked that back in the 50s, there were two sci-fi currents, one more conservative and one more left-leaning, represented by Astounding Stories and Galaxy Science Fiction. Here's what John Campbell, famed editor of Astounding Stories, had to say in a 1962 interview.
Well then, if science fiction appeals to the higher mind or the different mind than the suburban mind, why don't liberals, for example, beatniks, the sort of people who fancy themselves above the suburban type of mind, why don't they read science fiction?
Because one of the essences of good science fiction is a hard, solid mental discipline. You start recognizing that a human being is not the biggest thing in this universe. For one thing, the concept of God is not very popular with the beatnik type. Generally because it implies that there is something more important than his own personal opinions and his own personal ideas.
We're thus returning to our dichotomy, Clanton versus London, Astounding Stories versus Galaxy Science Fiction. Clanton is Flynn's idyllic home, anchored in reality, tradition, discipline, community, and deeply ingrained Christian values. London is Galaxy Science Fiction, a place where men imagine they can replace God. Indeed, members of the Research Institute and the kleptoligarchy act as if they were gods. They take whatever they feel like taking, they kill in cold blood, sometimes on a fancy, often exhibiting pleasure in stalking and killing their helpless prey. Their attachments, while not absent, are fleeting and their moods easily swinged. Strangely, the only faction in future London still showing some signs of, if not humility, at least consideration for something larger than themselves, is the Met Police. But even the Met Police and their Inspector Ainsley Lowbeer are limited in their views on government, as they themselves carry the trauma of the cataclysmic events that preceded their time frame. In one scene, Zubov explains that connecting to the past via the peripheral creates a new, causally unique branch in the timeline called a stub. To which Inspector Lowbeer replies, "But why do you call them that? Stubs. It sounds short, nasty, brutish." This exchange has two very subtle aspects to it. First, it is rather obvious that calling these new branches stubs, which points to a derivation and an unfinished one at that, allows Zubov and his minions to dehumanize or otherwise lower the importance of these branches and the consequences of their actions upon these branches. The other significant aspect is Inspector Lowbeer's Hobbesian attitude. Her characterization of the word stub as a reference to the bifurcation in the timeline is a direct nod to Hobbes's own views on life in his own timeline. In Hobbes's words, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Future 2099 London might have actually met with Hobbes's approval. Everything is predictable, nothing is surprising. Individuality is only allowed insofar as it does not cause disturbances or even perceived disturbances in the order of the state and the expectation of its citizens. Fear is the main problem in this brave new world. Algorithms, surveillance, and prediction are the three pillars of stability in the future. Future London is not a place for the unpredictable or the spontaneous. Even individual people use AIs to assist their cognition, which renders games like chess all but obsolete and human interaction boring. Individuals, dissidents, and rogues unwanted. This is the choke point between the old world, wild, spontaneous, and creative, and the new world, tightly controlled and predictable. This is why Flynn enjoys so much success in her confrontations with the characters of the new world. According to her own words, her tactic, even in regular simulations, is to break script, die a bunch, and then win. Future London is a safe space, a fake space, a Potemkin village, created not for the benefit of Catherine the Great's eyes, but for the deception of its own inhabitants. Indeed, Flynn and us, together with her, struggle to discern what is real and what is not in this future London. Crowds walking the Thames path are also artificially added in to fool real people into believing they're not so alone. What's even more surprising is that the real denizens of future London have full control over these illusions. The state, such as it is, provides only the infrastructure for these illusions, and the people choose whether to fool themselves or not. This visual contrast between the old and the new is ironically visible in future London as it is in contemporary London. One of the scenes in the series takes place near the building of the Royal Exchange. Here we can see in the series and in real-life London the old and the new, the classical architecture of the Exchange and the modern skyscrapers towering behind it. The world of future London is a deeply pessimistic one. Elita West gave up on her world and wants to save another, the old stub world. Flynn, on the other hand, despite the odds, remains faithful to her family, her connections, and her little town. She wants to save her own world. In her own words, like it or not, this here is the only world that I got. This is where we encounter again the clash between the many worlds interpretation and Gottfried Leibniz's best of all possible worlds, which I covered in the review for the three-body problem, which I encourage you to watch if you haven't already. Perhaps one of the most striking yet subtle ways Gibson and the creators of the series choose to portray the stark antithesis between the two worlds is the skillful use of language, more precisely in the way the characters of the story speak. Flynn, her brother, their friends, and everyone in the world of 2032 use a southern accent and make extensive use of contractions. They speak in a no-nonsense, let's get to the chase manner. Their speech is almost never neutral but warm and expressive. On the other hand, their counterparts in future London are the exact opposite. The passionate southern accent is met with a cold, restrained, and often elusive posh London accent. Ironically, as we're about to see, the southern accent has more to do with Old England than most people know. In his book Black Rednecks and White Liberals, Thomas Sowell had this to say, I quote, "The very way of talking, later to be christened Black English, closely followed dialects brought over from those parts of Britain from which many white Southerners came, though these speech patterns died out in Britain while surviving in the American South. Where a Northerner said, I am, you are, she isn't, it does or it doesn't, and I haven't, a Virginian, even of high rank, preferred to say I be, you be, she ain't, I don't, and I hain't. These Virginia speechways were not invented in America. They derived from a family of regional dialects that had been spoken throughout the south and the west of England during the 17th century. From these same regions of England came such words as yaller for yellow, axe for ask, across for across, y'all for you, bile for boil, do for door, this for this, and that for that. The southern character seeps through not only by way of language, but also in the temperament of the people of Clanton. Connor recounts how one of the guys sent to kill the Fishers had him in his sights and yet did not fire at him because he was a cripple. Connor's reaction, in turn, is sheer pride-driven anger. His natural instinct is to kill the one who spared his life but hurt his pride. So what we see in the Peripheral is the old English language and manners returning to England from America through Flynn. America is the new world compared to the England of the past, but it is the old world for the England of the future. Flynn, however enchanted by the oddities of the new world, brings with her the saving solution, the tradition of the old world. I hope you had as good a time watching this as I had preparing it. We are all invited to join the conversation in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like and share our content. Your support matters to us. Until next time.